All right, so yeah, so I spent 25 years or so as an HR exec in traditional corporate America. I left about 4 years ago to pursue kind of the entrepreneurial experience. Built a technology focused primarily on measuring workplace culture. The product and company at the time was called WorkXO. Our company was bought by QuestionPro just about a year ago, and since then I've been working with QuestionPro, which is a global survey-based analytics company, to really build out the entire suite of solutions, survey-based solutions, analytics solutions, all around employee experience, all around culture, engagement, et cetera. I've had this really strong interest and passion, maybe even for the kind of the intersection of data and people. I have felt strongly all along that data plays a really important role in helping certainly mature organizations um, manage what is a extremely complex and dynamic resource. Human beings have all sorts of layers and levels to them, and for us to think that we can manage them through gut and instinct um, is, at the very least dangerous and maybe even disastrous, or can be. Everything else in the world of work relies on data. There's no operating system in your business today that isn't deeply rooted in data, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing the same thing around our people. Historically, we've done that um, with some semblance of this thing that we call employee engagement. And employee engagement has served its purpose. It continues to serve its purpose. It's helped us really become more aware and certainly more in touch with this idea that understanding how our people are experiencing the workplace has a lot to do with how successful we become. But I think there's some shortcomings, and and I think we've all experienced those over the last, call it, 2 decades, that we've been really serious about this measure. Um, it doesn't mean, again, that it doesn't fit a purpose, but there are other things that we're starting to pay attention to. There are other measures out there. There's other data, and I want to talk to you guys today about one of them. One data point in particular that we are kind of increasingly bullish on. I'll caveat it by saying that not everybody is. There's probably kind of two camps out there, if not more. But um, I want to share with you a little bit more around how we use this measure, how we think, and why we think it makes a difference, and hopefully give you guys some things to think about as you get back into your own workplaces and continue to discuss, kind of what you should be looking at, what makes sense for your business, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think anybody on this call, in this webinar, is going to argue that data isn't important. We don't need to make that business case. We did a little bit of research around kind of just the profession of HR and really how prominent things like data and analytics are in the curriculum of how we're teaching people to become HR professionals. Even in the experiences that the typical HR professional has, data and analytics is still just kind of creeping onto the scene. So we have a lot to pay attention to. But there are countless reasons. I can give you a 3-ring binder that would point to the fact that we all should be spending, at the very least, a little bit more time thinking about it and talking about it. We know that the degree to which mature and profitable organizations use some sort of people analytics in not just their business, but in their business decisions, are that they're 3 times, those mature and profitable organizations are 3 times as likely to do that than those that are not mature and profitable. So there's something there at the very least, right? There are lots of things that we call people analytics or workforce analytics. The one that we all identify with pretty quickly is surveys. And as I've shared, that's where we spend a lot of our time. We think that gathering meaningful data directly from the source, the people that are on the ground, living and breathing, and experiencing the workplace firsthand, are the best people to give us data around what's happening. But we spend about $1 billion. We collectively spend about $1 billion on that a year. It's not a small number. It's probably going up, and really, who knows where it's headed. We also know that close to 50%, I think it's like 49% of HR leaders who actually do some sort of survey, some sort of employee survey, they'll admit that they rarely, if ever, do anything meaningful with the results of those surveys. Now, there's lots of reasons for that, and very few of them are actually the fault of HR. It is certainly not for lack of trying. It's not for lack of intent. It's just tough. If there's any department or function within an organization that is dealing with competing priorities and getting pulled in many a direction, it is HR, talent, human capital, whatever you want to call it. And it is just frankly difficult to turn data into results. There's some other things that are wrong with it, though. Again, not the least of which is that maybe we're looking at the wrong data, or maybe we're not getting the right data to help us really turn this into action. And that's, I think, why I want to share with you this. Primarily, I want to share with you kind of this alternative approach, this proxy, so to speak. The scarier statistic is this: that 80% of employees really say that they don't think their manager is actually going to take the time to respond to the feedback they provide. So why provide it? I mean, that's the simplest question, or the most important question. Why are we even doing this? I mean, should we really be asking for this if we're not going to do anything with it? And if 80% of the people, if this statistic has any ounce of legitimacy to it, so what? Maybe it's 60% or 50. This is scary. This is scary to me. That $1 billion is wasted by and large if this is the way that the rest of the world perceives our effort in gathering data on how our workforce experiences work. Now, if employee engagement admitted that all of you on this call are probably dealing in more than just employee engagement numbers, but because it's one that comes front and center and we're all familiar with it, and it's one we're going to focus on today, this is the first thing that we have to acknowledge. I mean, by and large, these scores have not changed in any measurable way in let's call it the last decade. I mean, have there been some blips? Yeah. Are those blips statistically significant? I mean, in some cases they are, and others not really. But even over the course of the last 8 years, we've seen an increase just around 10%. So, I mean, what does this mean? Does this mean that our employees are really happier? Does it mean that they're actually more connected, that they have a stronger sense of affiliation, that they're likely, or they have a higher intent to stay? I mean, that's what engagement tells us, right? But we also know that turnover numbers haven't changed. I mean, retention numbers haven't changed all that much. By and large, the picture has not changed. And I'm here to argue, although I don't know that we have the time to make the argument in a huge amount of detail, but I'm here to argue that over time, this number, this percentage, which is the amalgamation of a lot of different things, is not going to change. The composition of the workforce is not going to change. There will always be some subset of our workforce that just very simply is not satisfied with work. And it doesn't matter who they're working for or who they're working with. There will always be some person that wakes up on the wrong side of the bed when they're asked how engaged they are that day. I mean, this number will not change substantially over time. So then it begs the question, what's it really telling us? I mean, do we really change our behavior if we go from 63% one year to 62% the next year? Do we really change our behavior? And I think that's the question we should all be asking ourselves. Is the data that we're gathering, is it forcing us, is it challenging us, is it facilitating for us a new way of doing things to make an impact? So what I want us to focus on is, what's the quality of that 65%? Like, what's behind that? What's really driving that 65%? Are we really focused on the 35%? Or should we be focused on the 65%? Like that, these are the kinds of things that we wrestle with when we're talking about data, right? And I don't know that I necessarily have all the answers to this, but I think we should ask ourselves, why are we doing this? Why are we really measuring this? And if we don't have a good answer for that, then at the very least, maybe we should talking about, should we be measuring something different? So I want to talk a little bit about Employee Net Promoter Score. Now, hopefully, those of you on this call are not already rolling your eyes. I'm assuming that at the very least you've had some exposure to Employee Net Promoter Score. So let's just talk a little bit about what it is, first of all. It is an offshoot from the original Net Promoter Science that was developed by Reichheld and Bain and Company, first published in a HBR article, "The One Number You Need to Grow," back in 2003. And since then, it's really gained a bunch of momentum. Primarily, the original science is really around consumer-based measure of satisfaction or engagement. It is the extent to which, in the net promoter sense, people are likely to recommend you, the degree to which they are likely to recommend you, the quality of their recommendation for your product, your service, your whatever. In the sense of employment, the Employee Net Promoter Score, same thing. It's how likely are you to recommend someone you respect to this organization for employment. It is one question which has its merits in and of itself. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The answer to the question is on a 10-point scale. Those that answer with a 10 or a 9, those are your promoters. These are the people that are out there waving the flag. They are vocal and visible in promoting your brand. Again, whether that's your brand as a product or your brand as an employer. These are the people who are your strongest promoters. If you answer with an 8 or a 7, you're considered to be passive. So much so that frankly, or not frankly, but scientifically, formulaically, you're actually eliminated from the equation. You don't really count. You're kind of on the fence. We're frankly probably not all that concerned about the impact that you have one way or the other. And then if you're a 6 or below, you're a detractor. You're potentially damaging the brand, and maybe you're vocal and visible about that. You're probably not as productive and as optimal as you could be in your current role, and you are net impacting the overall strength of the brand. So the difference between those people who are promoters, the percentage of people who are promoters, and the percentage of people who are detractors, is what your ENPS is. That's your Employee Net Promoter Score. It's one number, just like employee engagement is. Employee engagement is one number. But employee engagement is an amalgamated number from lots of different things and lots of different questions, and what you choose to factor into your own employee engagement index has a lot to do with preference. It has a lot to do with which model you're using. Those models could be inconsistent across one provider or another. It's hard to benchmark that. This number is the same. It's calculated the same. It's based on the same question. You know, there's really no doubt about the science and what goes into it. So we measure this ENPS in really all of the employee experience surveys that we do with our clients, and specifically in our culture assessments and employee engagement assessments, and we actually use this number as the primary indicator of things like intent to stay, willingness to put forth discretionary effort, et cetera, et cetera. And there's some reasons why we do this. We've already talked about a little bit about them. One, it's easy, right? It's one number. I get it. I don't have to understand all that goes behind this. It's versatile. We can ask this question anytime, any place, anywhere. I can ask it as part of an annual survey. I can ask it after you've been with us for 30 days. I can ask it while you're leaving the organization. I can ask it at any place along the employee journey. I can ask that one question and gather the same kind of data around it. I can ask it in a pulse way. I could throw this one question out once a week to a random selection of employees. I can monitor trend over time. I can see how this thing is moving up or down a lot easier than it is for me to go ahead and execute an entire employee engagement survey again. This one question can give us still that glimpse of trend. It's a lot more tangible for the C-suite. There's C-suite endorsement behind this number. They already recognize it on the market side, on the consumer side, on the product side. And it's much easier to get their arms around. It's not as nebulous. It's not, okay, what is this thing that we call engagement? This has cross-functional application. This complements customer or consumer experience, CX, right? I mean, many organizations have entire teams, they've invested entire operating systems in measuring customer experience. There's some really strong correlation between employee experience and customer experience. And watching how one drives the other is really fascinating. We're not going to get into that today, but again, there's applicability there. And you can correlate those two numbers directly. It's harder to correlate engagement and net promoter score because they're two different measures. They're two different approaches. It's a leading indicator. I mean, even in the way that the question is asked, how likely are you to do something? And in this case, how likely are you to go out there and promote this brand? I mean, although nuanced, although slight, the distinction is important. This is about what I am going to do, right? A lot of what happens and a lot of what we measure in employee engagement is about what we've already done, what's already happened to us. And oh, by the way, once we've done the survey, we've gotten the data, we've analyzed it, we've shared it with everybody, we've talked about it, and then we've asked for plans around it. We're 6 months down the road. You can respond to this the minute you're getting information around it. And finally, it's highly correlative. And we'll talk about correlation. I mean, I know that principle makes sense to you, but to me, this is really where the power is. Because again, it's one question, because again, it's one measure, because it's one field of data, we can take this number and we can correlate it with any other thing that we're measuring in the workplace. So if we're gathering data on certain behaviors that people experience or they don't experience, we can consistently correlate that to what's happening with ENPS. And we can start to understand maybe what's driving this number up or down, which allows us to then start prioritizing, planning, et cetera, et cetera. We'll talk more about that in just a slide or two here. So just to do some math in your head, right? So this data right here is based on the entire data set that we have from any organization that we've ever worked with. We have around 700,000 data points across the globe. So on average, from all of those organizations and in that data set, the employee net promoter score is 18. Now, what I really like, and I think other clients like, or other organizations like about employee net promoter scores, and what we say about benchmark, is that this is really meant to be an internal benchmark. It doesn't really matter if your competitor down the street is a 19 or a 25. What matters is that you've set a baseline. Okay, we know that we're 18. That's kind of where we live. So our job is to just get us to 19, and then to 20, and then to 21. And let's look for a positive trend. Let's look for an uptick. That's all we're looking for. We're not looking to get to 100. By the way, employee net promoter score, by the way it's designed, the highest score you can have is 100. The lowest you can have is a negative 100. And we've seen it as high as 100. Yes, we actually have one client that has an employee net promoter score of 100. And we've seen it as low as negative 62. So there's a spectrum. But again, this is not about, okay, what's the other guy doing? Or what's the average employee engagement around the world? No, this is about who we are. Let's watch that trend. Okay. Let's talk about correlation for a second. I'm going to try not to get totally data geeked out here, but we love this. Basically, this is about comparing drivers to outcomes. It's really about if this, then what? If we do this, more of this, less of this, then what happens? And understanding that in the context of work is, I think, what to I think a big degree we've been missing. We haven't been really completing that sentence. If this, then what? Now, there are a lot of formulas out there. There are a lot of recipes out there for great places to work. I mean, we talk about that all the time, right? But unfortunately, if you really take a look at that, those recipes are really all about doing more of everything. You know what? There are a bunch of desirable behaviors in the workplace. Nobody's going to argue with that. There are a lot of things that we'd love to see more of. But I'm pretty sure, and our data shows us this, that some of those things impact some organizations a lot stronger than others. And a lot of that has to do with the workforce you have, the market that you're operating in, what you're trying to do. I mean, just take flexibility. Let's talk about flexible work arrangements, or let's talk about flexibility in the broadest sense. I can work wherever and whenever I want to, as long as it allows me to do my best work. Okay, that sounds pretty cool, right? On paper, that sounds pretty cool to a lot of people. And again, nobody's going to argue with it. That's kind of a nice thing. But is that the right thing? Is that really going to make an impact in your organization? Or of all the things that we could be doing, and we can't be doing them all, but of all the things that we could be doing, is that the one thing that we should be doing? I mean, the war for talent, pardon the cliche, is a game or a war that's won in inches, not miles, not even yards, like inches. So let's stop trying to be all things to all people, and let's focus on the one or two or three things that are going to help us really move the needle in our organization. Not Google or Zappos, because those guys are really cool and they figured all this stuff out. No. What's going to happen? What's going to make a difference in our organization? And this is where correlation comes into play. If you can take a column of data related to a particular behavior that you're gathering information on in your workplace, let's use the flexibility example, and let's compare that to what happens with employee net promoter score. Is there a strong correlation between those two numbers? If there is a strong correlation to those numbers, it begs the question, maybe these two things are related to some degree, or otherwise, right? It's not that simple, and the algorithms are a little bit more complex, but generally that's what we're talking about here. So in the science, yes, one is your strongest correlation. If you compared a column of data around employee net promoter score to a column of data around employee net promoter score, you would have one. That is your correlation. If you have a negative one, that's an inverse correlation. It just means the opposite happens, right? If you want to do this in Excel, you can practice it, or Google Docs or Sheets, sorry. The formula is, it's Pearson. This formula that you see in front of you is Pearson's correlation. Pearson, and then your first array is the first column of data that you want to compare, and the second array is the second column of data that you want to compare, and you want to compare those two. All you got to do is do that, and you'll see what the correlation is. Okay. So of those 700,000 data points that we've gathered, and of the comparisons that we've done between behaviors and employee net promoter score, we've learned a couple of things. And some of this may be a little bit counterintuitive to what we've always learned or taught or been focused on, at least in the last, again, 20 years. The very strongest correlation, again, across all organizations across the globe, is that if I do more of my company spends time understanding and then responding to my individual and unique needs, employee net promoter score will go up. And if I do less of that, employee net promoter score will go down. Now that's all about customization. That's all about taking the time to, first of all, recognize that everybody who's in your organization is potentially there for a different reason. We're not all signing up for the same stuff. And that what works for Jimmy doesn't necessarily work for Jane. And understanding that that experience can be customized, and then responding to that in a customized way can have a tremendous impact on the extent of connection, affiliation, engagement, etc. Now, that's not easy necessarily, but the extent that you can do more of that, our studies, our data shows us it will have an impact on things like employee net promoter score. I mean, think about customization today in the market. There's nothing that you can not customize, right? I mean, from every product that you can buy on Amazon to any other digital marketer, to the experiences that you have while you travel, everything can be customized. Why aren't we doing that in the workplace? Why aren't we doing that in the workplace? It's hard, right? But we know it has an impact. Now, the opposite side of this, the weakest correlation, the thing that does not appear to have any direct, or as much at least, direct impact on things like employee net promoter score, is customers / stakeholders influence what we do. Okay, I mean, again, is that a desirable behavior? Yeah, it is. Does it really change our experience? No, not really. This is a little bit about kind of the age-old discussion around, customers come first. Okay, we can have that conversation. Many of you will not like hearing this, and every time I share it with a client, they have trouble with it. But those organizations that are really busting the traditional paradigms of work, like really blowing it up, are the ones that are willing to say, customers don't come first, employees do. Now, those two things are really, really, really strongly connected. And that's why they're willing to say our employees come first, because we know that if we, again, provide our employees a customized experience, that it is going to have a tremendous impact, positive impact on our customers and stakeholders. One leads to the other. But one does come before the other. And that's an important distinction. And I think this correlation kind of shows us this. The second weakest is around flexibility. Again, we all think we need more flexibility. Not necessarily. I mean, not necessarily. Again, would we argue that it's a bad thing or a good thing? No, probably not. But not for everybody, and not for every organization. This, mix of benefits and employee programs and policies and procedures. I mean, some of the stuff is like table stakes now. Yeah, you know what? Like, we want it, but it's not going to necessarily change our experience because, by the way, we can get it everywhere now, and we expect to. So this is interesting, but this is the kind of conversation that you can start to have. You know, we always say that the data in and of itself does not solve your problems, right? It doesn't give you all the answers. But if it fuels a better conversation, a more meaningful conversation, that's where the power comes into play. And if you can start to list and inventory the kinds of behaviors that appear to be having a more direct impact on your desired outcomes, again, you're correlating behaviors to outcomes, then you're having a more meaningful conversation about it. So the studies that we've done, and this is a random representation of 51 of our clients, again, across the globe, different verticals. The blue chart, or the blue bars, are the employee net promoter score. You can see it ranges from as low as negative 100 to as high as 100 on the left-hand side of this. And then the orange dots are the extent to which those workplace behaviors that we measure, and they're not unlike what you're used to seeing in things like employee engagement surveys and otherwise, the extent to which those behaviors show up. The more those behaviors show up, and the more that they show up in a way, again, that's unique to the organization, i.e., they focus on those behaviors that really matter to their organization, employee net promoter score goes up. There's a really strong linear regression here. There's no argument about that. It's not 1-to-1, but it's pretty darn close. In fact, it's 0.83. Sorry, again, geeking out a little bit here, but that means that as your employee experience score goes up, so then does eNPS. That to me is convincing. We've seen organizations gain as many as 40 points just by moving their eNPS, or their employee experience score, by 2 points. So there's there's convincing stuff here. I think on the other slide, I can't remember what slide this was on. Maybe it's on one to come, but a little caveat here, a little disclaimer. Correlation is not causation. All right, I mean, and we won't get into statistics today, but correlation means that there's a relationship. Causation means that relationship, that the one thing is in fact causing the other thing. Now there could be lots of things causing this relationship, right? And we haven't proven the causation yet. I don't know that any organization has. But correlation is better than nothing. It's better than gut, it's better than instinct. It's a great place to have the conversation. And I can tell you anecdotally that there's a lot of face validation out there around this. People nod their heads. Organizations go, yeah, this makes sense. And by the way, it's working for us. So take that for what it's worth. Zach, I think we're getting close on time here. I can't remember exactly how much time we have allotted. I do want to leave some time for Q&A. I've got just a couple more slides here. In fact, I think this is the last one. So some things to think about. In any sort of survey that you do, any sort of gathering of data from your employees, make sure that you have statistical significance. Too often we throw out these surveys and we collect a bunch of responses only to find out that we didn't get enough people to respond. The average response rate for employee surveys, all employee surveys, is between 40 and 60%. That's not great. Now, statistical significance depends a lot on how large your population is. We won't get into the science around that, but we try to shoot for a level that brings us a 95% confidence level with less than a 5% margin of error. That means that we have to get a certain number of respondents every time we do a survey. And if we don't get it, we don't close the survey. We don't close the survey until we have enough responses. One data point is interesting. Multiple data points are a lot more convincing. We can actually start to pay attention to trend, see what's happening over time. Snapshot doesn't work anymore. Data is way more fluid in our world today. We are not taking that fluidity to the workplace. Most organizations still do one survey a year. Some will do it only every other year. I got off the phone today with an organization that does one major survey a year, and then they do a mini survey in the off year. Now, it's better than nothing, but we all know what happens when we take a snapshot. That's all it is. So what can we do to be gathering data over time, over trend, so that we can look at this in real time, constantly? Again, I would argue that eNPS is a great way to do that. It's one question. You don't have to do a huge survey, and you can do it at any time. You got to maintain anonymity. I mean, I've had this debate since I was probably 12 years old. Sorry, that was hyperbole, for a long time. And I don't care what you think. I mean, I can say this because I was an HR exec for 25 years. Nobody is trusted in the workplace when it comes to giving candid, real feedback. Now, if you're one of those organizations that really feels you've built that level of trust, awesome. Just go have some great conversations with people. That helps. But those conversations are hard to quantify. They're hard to draw real kind of reasonable conclusions around, right? So if you're gonna do a survey, if you're gonna gather data, the employee has to really have confidence that their input is protected, that they remain anonymous, and that obviously that's confidential. There's always a second question with eNPS or NPS, and that's an open-ended question. Okay, basically tell us more about how you responded or why you responded or what it would take for this organization to increase the likelihood you would recommend someone you respect to work there. Now you get a little bit more context, get a little bit more color. It's always a nice idea to give people that opportunity. As it relates to open-ended comments, take them with a grain of salt. There are many people use an open-ended comment box as a dumping ground, right? Just to get everything and anything off their chest. Don't take any individual comment in and of itself too seriously. But if you start to see a trend around it, pay some attention to that. Beware of survey fatigue, right? There's no shortage of surveys out there today. We got to be really careful about that. And I'm in the business of surveys, right? So I believe strongly that organizations need to be really thoughtful about what surveys they're doing, why they're doing them, and they need to be able to demonstrate that while they do them, they actually have a plan of action around them. Again, Employee Net Promoter Score is a great survey. It doesn't get to survey fatigue. It's one question. There's ways to do it so that you hit a button on your mobile phone or in your email. You don't even have to really take the survey. As we talked about correlation, that one measure, eNPS, is an outcome, right? But unless you're gathering data on the drivers, i.e. the behaviors, the words, the actions that your employees are experiencing or not, then that outcome, that measure in and of itself doesn't tell us a whole lot. We want to understand what's behind it, what's driving it. And finally, don't even bother doing any of this if you're not going to do anything with the data. It's not worth your time. It's not worth your energy. It's not worth your money. And it's not worth the disappointment that you'll cause your employees as a result. I mean, have good intentions, but be serious about it. We ought to be investing in how we gather data from the workforce as if it were any other important operating system in our business. I believe in that strongly. But don't make that investment if you're not really willing to take that level of attention. That's all I got, man. I'd love to talk to you guys at all, offline. Otherwise, reach out to me any one of these places. I'd love to hear about what you're doing in your own workplaces to capture data, and then what you do with it once you get it. There is no one answer to any of this, and so I'm always curious to hear how others are solving for this. I think, Zach, we've got a little bit of time for Q&A if that's something that we want to do, or if you've got anything in the chat.
Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to post it in the chat. We'll take a minute here as those come in. Otherwise, Charlie will also be at CultureCon, so you can see his full presentation there and chat with him more. But yeah, any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat below.
The presentation at CultureCon, by the way, I promise will be different. So if you choose to attend both, you'll get a little bit of a different flavor.
All right. I don't see any questions coming in, but again, feel free to reach out to Charlie at the email he has on the screen or shoot them to us at CultureCon and we can pass them on. But yeah, Charlie, thanks again for giving us your presentation. It's really interesting and we're excited to have you at CultureCon next month.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.